Hello, welcome to the Convenience Store Emergency Planning webinar. I still see a few people signing in, so I'm going to begin in a couple of seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Convenience Store Emergency Planning webinar. I see a few people signing in, so just keep adding on as you can, and hopefully you can see our slides. So convenience stores sell 80% of the fuel in the United States. We have more than 1/3 of the ATMs in the country and are often the last places open before a disaster strikes and the first ones open after. The community depends on convenience stores in a disaster. First responders depend on stores at all hours of the day and night, clear skies, or in the middle of a hurricane. Welcome to our emergency planning webinar brought to you by NACS. My name is Carolyn Schneer, and I'm the NACS Director of Strategic Initiatives. During this next hour, we're going to introduce you to the emergency planning process, share examples of planning best practices, and walk you through the NACS resources created for businesses of all sizes. A few housekeeping announcements before we get started. All lines will remain muted for the duration of the webinar. I encourage you to type your questions and comments in the sidebar, and we will address as many as possible at the end of the presentations. This presentation is being recorded and will be available online in the coming days. You can also access the resources that we will reference in this presentation right now at convenience.org/disasterplan. Before we get started, I'd like to ask everyone here a few questions. So you're going to see it pop up on your screen, and go ahead and answer them when you can. So first question, do you have an emergency plan for your company? Yes or no? Awesome. So I see we're at about 82% saying yes. Now I'm going to ask you another question. Do you have emergency plans for your individual stores? Yes or no? Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so we're at about half. I'm liking that. Keep voting. There we go. We got 58% of you said yes, 42% no. So we're going to walk you through that a little bit. And last question, are emergency procedures included in your employee onboarding training? Yes or no? Awesome. All right. So just like the other ones, we're at about 63% of you saying yes. So regardless of where you are in your process, I guarantee you're going to learn something today. You'll either learn how to get started, how to validate what you already do, and you'll hear how very important convenience stores are to your communities. You can see some stats on the screen here for those of you who are in the industry. You can see how strong we are. As those of you not in our industry, you're learning a little bit more about convenience stores, and you're going to look at us differently. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to briefly introduce our two speakers today. First, we're going to hear from Craig Fugate, former FEMA administrator and former director for Florida's Emergency Management Division. Craig coined the term the Waffle House Index, which emergency officials use to determine the level of attention a disaster area requires based on whether the Waffle House is open at the time of the emergency services arrive. Maybe we'll change that to the Convenience Store Index one of these days. Second, we're going to hear from Jim Morentz, who's representing Craig Fugate Consulting and SABER. Jim has worked for many years in the field of emergency operation, and he leads the team that has researched and developed the convenience store emergency planning resources we're going to talk about today. This project has been made possible by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's National Infrastructure Protection Plan Security and Resilience Challenge. That's a mouthful. NACS was awarded this project to help convenience stores plan for the unexpected, to help them get open faster and stay open longer. Our industry is extremely important in supplying fuel, food, supplies, ice, water, power, and much more to the community. And now let's go ahead and get started on how to make that happen. Take it away, Craig.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. This is Craig Fugate, and thanks for participating today. In my career in emergency management, when I first started out, almost all the conversations were about what government was going to do. And after Hurricane Andrew, the state of Florida took many steps to become better prepared. And under Governor Jeb Bush, we were hit with over 4 hurricanes in the 2005 or 2004 hurricane season, and then we were hit again in 2005. And one of the lessons I learned was that as much as we talk about what government's going to do, what was even more important was what the private sector was able to do. And as we saw communities being devastated by these storms, first thing we saw was during evacuations, the tremendous demand for gas and emergency supplies. And as much as we tell people to stock up and prepare before, they tendency is to wait to the last minute. And in most communities, that was the convenience stores. They were going to get gas. They were going to get those last minute supplies. On evacuation routes, again, it was the convenience stores that were often the first line that the public went to. And then immediately after the storms, again, convenience stores were that first line. But they could only be that first line if they could get open. And as we saw power coming back on, some did better than others, but it was very evident that convenience stores, not just what government's doing, but what convenience stores were often the place where the public saw the first assistance available. And the fact that it was the private sector kind of forced me into thinking differently, that we couldn't be government centric anymore. We had to really look at all of the resources of the community as part of that team. The term private public partnership started getting popular about that time. But I took it a little bit further and said, it's not about a partnership as much as it's part of the team. And we coined the term at FEMA, the whole of the community, to really emphasize that government has key roles and responsibilities, but government by itself was never going to be as effective as our community whole, and particularly in the private sector, those that were in the retail space. And as the previous slide shows, it is amazing to me how much of what we think about everyday services, particularly fuel, is done by convenience stores. And so when we were asked to do this project, I was like very enthusiastic because logistically, FEMA's always struggled with working with our state and local partners. How do we get the supplies to that last mile? Well, it turns out convenience stores are even closer than the last mile. In fact, for most Americans, you're the closest place to get any supplies, get fuel. And so the opportunity to work with the convenience store community on helping do better planning, looking at how to better prepare your staff and deal with some of the things that we see are reoccurring emergencies, we thought this was a great partnership. But I'm also aware that businesses, and particularly smaller convenience store where you're a single owner or a small chain, turnover employees, it's very difficult to spend a lot of time on this. And so working with the National Association of Convenience Stores and some of their folks, we were able to develop some very short, simplified videos. It may be hard for somebody to sit down and be given a 3-ring binder and read it and really understand it. We think the videos are a really good adjunct to that, giving some practical illustrations. Again, the caveat with all of this is we could never write a plan so detailed that it took care of every possible scenario that your store would face. And so these documents are provided to you to edit to those. Also, because we were doing this nationwide, there may be parts of the country that are more earthquake prone than others, areas that may be more prone to tropical weather and hurricanes. But the one threat we know everybody faces is flooding. So taking all that into account, my partner, Jim's going to go into more of that detail, but it really, to me, this was a great opportunity. We wanted to make it so that we could provide information and tools at all levels, but also simplify it. And then the last thing I want to close with, I was in government for a long time, and I was always on the other side responding to disasters. But in 2017, I left the federal government. I was home in Gainesville. And in 2017, Hurricane Irma paid us a visit. Well, Gainesville, Florida is inland. We're in North Florida. Not exactly what many people thought would be the area of hard impact by the storm. But in the days leading up to that storm, numerous evacuees had come up from South Florida, and gas was in short supply. And I was, just like everybody else, was needing to get gas in the middle of all that. And I went to a local convenience store. And I have to say that store manager, she had her act together. She had her team out there directing traffic. There were long lines for gas. But she and her team kept it organized. She kept people informed. And it was really, I think, the best illustration of what I've seen is when you have, the store is open, but your team knows what to do. Even though the lines were long, even though everybody was stressed, that manager and her team got everybody through that ordeal. And I remember that. And so I have a tendency now to think about when I'm getting gas to remember, who was it that was really focused on this, had a good plan, and was taking care of folks versus others that weren't as well organized, people cutting in lines, fights breaking out. They're having to call law enforcement to do traffic control. So this is also, I think, something that as we talk about this, we also got to think about it as a bottom line issue. Customers remember their service and your availability both before and after disasters. The more that you can provide those services, I think that also helps to build customer loyalty. And we've seen this in Florida. I've seen it in other places. Those that get open first, those that are able to provide services, those that provide a good operating environment, people tend to come back to. So, from all of the phases that I've dealt with, this idea that government's going to respond to disasters without the private sector, we've proven false. You're part of that team. You are that logistical supply chain, that last block, that last mile. You are the first gas station that most people are going to be able to get to, and you'll be the last station that go to when they're evacuating. Our ability to work as a team to help you be available and provide these services will actually, I think, support all of the local, state, and federal emergency managers in ways that even they won't anticipate. But you've taken the first step. Many of you already have plans in place. As Carolyn said, this is an opportunity to update, review, maybe learn something different. But for those of you that don't have that plan yet, haven't thought about it, maybe not had a lot of experience with disasters, use these tools. Because the other bottom line issue is those stores that get open and serve their communities are the ones that are most likely to survive. One of the unfortunate statistics that we saw in Florida and we saw in FEMA, small businesses, particularly individual stores and small chains, are least likely to survive disaster impacts if they're not prepared and have a plan. So that I want to turn it over to my partner, Jim Morantz, who has been working on this stuff and is going to kind of go over the products and the tools and how we think they could be useful to you. And then we'll be here for your questions. Jim?
Thanks, Craig, and good thoughts, especially that ending, that this is a business bottom line, that the FEMA statistics show that 40% of businesses don't open after a disaster. And this really is an attempt, first of all, to help you stay open longer, reopen faster, and make certain that the convenience store is there for years to come to support the community. The program, as Carolyn mentioned, is through the Department of Homeland Security. And one of the first things that we were told that you have to do in this program is to understand what's out there. So as we see, we got here by beginning with research. And what we found first was we said, okay, what is the state of emergency planning? And we saw that many organizations had a great big stack of things in a 3-ring binder. Others dealt with things that are simply a checklist. Some really had a certified plan that had been taken through their legal department. But many more, it was a yellow sticky sheet that was part of their to-do list. So we understood what existed in the emergency planning departments of convenience stores. Added to that were 2 components. One of them was regulations. HAZWOPER and certain other food and safety regulations tell you what you should be doing at a store level to deal with certain types of those commodities that you're providing, fuel, food, and others. As well, there's a whole host of advice out there. FEMA has advice on, you see there, the hurricane toolkit. It has multiple different hazards. Small Business Administration tells you how to prepare for a number of different kinds of hazards. Even the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and local chambers of commerce have produced documents. But all those are a little bit more general, but we combine them in order to produce the first deliverable of this project, which was a research document called Existing Materials, Appropriateness and Utility for the Convenience Store Business for Planning and Training Purposes. So that appropriateness and utility was what we were seeking out of all this, because convenience stores are a unique environment, open 24 hours a day. As a matter of fact, we encountered some people we interviewed who had never closed their store. I mean, never. Forget a disaster, it just never closed. They had a plan of sorts, would have never been exercised, and even in one of the interviews of people after a hurricane, they couldn't find the key to lock the store because they never closed. So very unique environment in the convenience store industry. So that led us to taking that appropriateness and utility into a set of best practices. And on the next slide, we see that we've got this list of topic areas down the left-hand side, and don't bother trying to read them. We'll talk about them more. But I extracted those out of all of those plans and guidance documents, and then took a look at them on the next one with a view to what that materials were that we gathered to structure the plan, get the content, and really pull out a draft set of best practices. That is, things that convenience stores said we successfully did, that government regulations and advice often said this is a good thing for you to do, but in fact the convenience store plans made it more specific. So we ended up with this best practices document. And the next thing we did was then say, hey, is this valid? So we went out to our convenience store partners, and there were well over 20 partners, probably 40 to 50 people reviewed it. These were from the biggest companies that existed down to individual operators. We stratified those who reviewed across the different sizes of convenience stores. So had some participating who had a dozen stores in a very specific geographic location, others that covered multi-state areas, and others that were completely national environments. And each of them gave us wonderful time and great input, and we are indebted to their contributions to this program that allowed us to take the rough outline, the best practices, and then really narrow that down and hone it into a couple of specific products. Those specific products were an emergency planning document and emergency job aids. And a very important part of that emergency planning document was to evaluate the job aids for their appropriateness and utility to the individual store. So that emergency planning document was policies and procedures, systems, resources, training, really what the company needed in order to make the job aids work. So what we did was evaluate those, build the job aids in order to have them evaluated in this emergency planning document. The job aids are, as in contrast to the emergency plan that says this is how you should get ready, the job aids are how you take action, very specifically oriented towards a store manager or a store employee. And it tells them how to prepare, cautions to take, actions they're going to have to take, the protections that they need and that they will provide, as well as their overall responsibilities. And the combination of allowing one to evaluate the job aids, build the planning resources that you have in order to execute the job aids resulted in two different versions of the emergency planning documents that we have now. The first of these versions is open to everyone. Carolyn mentioned you can go down, the website listing will be at the end of the slides, but you can go there onto the NACS website, and NACS is performing a community service to provide this information to anybody who needs it. Government, private sector, big companies, small companies, all this is available. And what that provides is the emergency planning document that tells you how to get ready, and the job aids, all of which are formatted in what we call the NACS branding. So you see the NACS name on all of them. And that NACS branding allows us to create a handout document, electronic and physical document. For those of you who are downloading this who are not NACS members, the most customization you can do is just pick which job aids that you want to do. But the second version is for NACS members, and obviously there's always a commercial, and joining NACS is a benefit to everyone. But this second version is available to NACS members, and what that allows you to do is use the emergency planning document to evaluate the job aids and then customize them down to the specific item, and we'll look at that in a minute, to personalize them, to say, hey, here's the phone number you should call when you are doing a reporting up to corporate headquarters, and to then create a store branded with your name and logo version of this tool. So really making it individual to the company, or even individual to a single store, where the emergency job aids, a small group from the store could spend quiet times from midnight till 2 o'clock in the morning going through the job aids and say, this one's stupid, it doesn't fit for us, or we don't even sell gas, so let's throw out this section on gas. So those two versions are critical to understand with what's available to all of you. So now let's take a look at these job aids, because this is really the core of the content that we want to have. And we'll see there are 20 some job aids here. We know down that list, earlier list that you saw is larger than this as we focused in our attention and ended up with these specific job aids. Couple of key points, overall theme: protect your customers, protect your employees, keep the store open longer, and resume operations as quickly as it's safe to do so. And all those are specific to the job aids, and we'll look at some of these in particular. The purpose of these job aids, the way that you can use them, is they can become part of your onboarding training. They can be refresher training, and they can even be what we would call on-demand training when there's a hurricane coming up the coast, or the wildfires have come across the ridge and you haven't dealt with wildfires before. Pull out the job aid that says, how are we going to evacuate the store if that fire comes over the ridge? So each one of these can be used in multiple ways. And for those of you who aren't NACS members who want to customize them, you may very well never want an employee to know how to assess the store damage. That's something that is always going to be done by a manager. So there may be a subset of these plans that you pull out, and each one of them is on a separate page or a separate 2-page section. So you can pull them out and say, here are the 5 things that I want every employee to know during onboarding training. And then here are 2 more when we have an impending emergency. Here are 2 more I want you to read right now so that you can be ready for the emergency that happens. One final caveat: everything might not apply to every store, and clearly observe local, state, and federal laws and regulations, because sometimes those govern actions, particularly in the reopening of the store. There are a few states that are going to require a health inspection before you can reopen the store. So you need to be aware of that as a potential condition to the actions that you're taking, and we have attempted to highlight areas where that might exist in the job aids. So let's take a look at a specific job aid here, just as an example. I'm going to start out with the pair of them. We'll look at one of those that's key. Employees, protect yourself. And you do that by protecting yourself and your family. So these two are ones that we would hope at every point, every employee would get handed these two job aids. One's one page, one's a couple of pages here in the supply list, and be sent home and said, hey, we need you to come to work. And you're not going to want to come to work if you don't feel your family's safe. This is a set of plans appropriate for you to carry home to put the supplies together so that you will know your family's safe and can come back to work, which means you keep getting a paycheck and you keep serving the community. So an orientation to the message that we're trying to provide through this is contained in that protect yourself and how you protect your family. The next one is where there's going to be what I would describe as sort of a fundamental choice that takes place when an event happens. The two key choices are, you going to evacuate the store or are you going to keep people there? If you can get people back and forth and keep the store open, that's dealt in the third place, but this is where something bad is happening. And in the case of evacuating now, it is often under an order from local police or fire saying everybody has to be out of here at a certain time. The shelter in place is often another order that comes and says, roads are closed, you may not leave this store. These two job aids help you walk through the process of very quickly evacuating, shows you what to shut down and how to get out quickly. The shelter in place describes what you need to have in the store in order to support not just your employees, but any customers who might be around who need to shelter in place and need to be part of your little mini community there while the emergency passes. This can be from a few minutes to a few hours to perhaps even a couple of days in a flooding event where the convenience store might be isolated. Quick note, you'll see it in the job aids though, that generally laws in states say that an employee or a customer cannot be forced to shelter in place. So you want to be inviting rather than demanding. And even if the police are telling people you have to go into that building, it's between the individual and the police. You shouldn't be putting yourself as a convenience store employee between the customer and their rights to go out and harm themselves if they would. So some really key information about two of the most critical decisions that one would ever make in running a convenience store. But what we want to do really is think about reopening that store. So that's what the next set of job aids are. And that reopening the store as quickly as possible begins by how you close the store. So this job aid, it's one of the longer ones that takes you through, how do I protect my business finances? How do I close down my business so I don't come back and discover that the cash drawer is empty or that the night deposit wasn't made? How do I handle my business finances? Secondly, how do I protect the technology to make it come back online as quickly as possible? Then we broaden that out is, I've got my property, my building, all the things that are on the property. And then additionally, I've got my inventory, because if I come back and I could have taken all my tobacco products, wrapped them up and put them up on the top shelf, and instead they're sitting on a spot on the floor where it got flooded and I just lost thousands of dollars of inventory, that's something on you, and one that you need to plan for in closing that store so that every step you take helps you get reopened faster. So again, business element, throughout this, you're going to see the protection of people and the protection of your businesses as our themes. And in that terms of protecting the business, if it's safe to stay open, we want to help you stay open, because that means you're going to be there protecting the community and offering them a safe haven. So this job aid, keep the store open in an emergency, is again one of the medium length ones, and we're actually going to see the video about this, that guide you through how to operate in an emergency, what you need to do to be safe, protect, but keeping an eye open to operating in a stressful environment, because people will be coming in who are probably evacuating, which means leaving their homes to the hazard, and they will be under a degree of stress. So we talk about how to handle customers during this period when you're keeping the store open. The next one is, hey, if you had to close, let's get it reopened quickly. This job aid has two components to it. One of them is get you, the manager and the employee, back to work, and then open the store, because there are going to be certain people who are going to need to be first in line when the store opens. So they're going to be coming through a more hazardous environment, perhaps, in order to get the store prepared to be open. So two different steps there: how to bring the employees safely back, again, our theme of employee safety, and then when they're back, how to reopen the store most efficiently so you don't blow out your computers by turning on the circuit breakers in the wrong order, and things like that. So very specific set. And again, it focuses on employees, getting power on, working with the fuel, and then getting the business side of the store back in place. And the last thing is actually one that I want to describe for you as the first thing you can do also, because this job aid is the annual review that says once a year you should sit down and go back through this, which is a checklist that relates back to all the components that you need to have in place for the job aids to work properly. Well, that's also a good thing to pick right off of the last pages in the job aids and walk around your store and give yourself a self-assessment of what, if you follow our plan, you'll also be reviewing a year later. So this is a great way to take a look at that emergency plan, and 80% of you said you have an emergency plan. Great. This is a way to walk through that plan and say, yep, got this handled. This one I might want to put a little star next to because there may be more that I can do for it. And especially those of you who only had I think it was 52% of you had written plans for the stores themselves. This would be the kind of thing to hand to a store manager and say, it'll take you about half an hour on a quiet time, walk through the store. You're going to see what hazards might be potentially making your store vulnerable, how your employees are prepared, how your physical structure is, all the elements that are essential to getting started on that plan if there isn't one for the store, or for adapting the company plan to the store plan. So that's what is the key for, and our focus was store managers and employees, these job aids. Now, to help speed the process along, we developed a set of preparedness videos. And these preparedness videos are designed to, in a minute or less, take you through 6 different areas that are a summary of the job aids. First 2, evacuate now and shelter in place. I told you those were the most critical decisions that you would perhaps ever make. Stay open in emergency, guide you through all or most of the steps that are necessary in order to be able to remain there, serving the community. Closing the store, getting back to work, opening the store is that sort of life cycle of what happens when there's a problem and you close the store, and then how you get people back to work and how you reopen the store. So those 6 range in length from, I think, 1 minute and 1 second to 2 minutes and 40 seconds, something like that. And what we're going to do, just to give you a flavor of it, we're going to show you one of those and then turn it back to Carolyn to moderate any of the questions. So thanks for your attention, and your video will be launching momentarily.
If safe to do so and you have power and employees, good stores stay open through the emergency. Emergency responders and customers who are evacuating or returning to their homes depend on you. You are critical to our staying in business, and everyone becomes part of our emergency management team. Two-way communication is key. The store needs to know employees' realistic work availability to plan the shift schedules. And employees want assurances about their job security and working conditions. Use regular breaks to give everyone a chance to share problems, hear from management, and dispel rumors. Staying open can mean having to stay a while, bring medications, sleeping gear, and anything else you need. Working in an emergency can be risky, so know the designated meeting place in case of an evacuation. Maintain rigorous safety procedures. Only trained employees do gasoline spill cleanup or use PPE or handle LPG. The store emergency kit should help keep employees safe, feed them, and care for small injuries. If media show up, don't talk with them unless you are authorized. Pay attention to what's happening outside and be alert to changes that could affect the store. Be patient with customers. They are under a lot of stress too. Let community responder agencies know the store is open and tell them company policy on any special treatment for responders and volunteers. Communicate with your customers personally and with signs, websites, social media, and mobile apps to manage expectations and correct misinformation. Follow company policy on donating items to the public or emergency responders. Serve the community well, and if you have a problem staying open, let local authorities know what you need. In an emergency, the fuel demand is likely to be high and the atmosphere intense. When a line of vehicles forms, an employee in a safety vest should walk the line to tell drivers about the fuel supply. Watch your fuel inventories so that you can shut down product supply if tanks are running low. Make certain that your food storage, freezers, and preparation are safe as always. You may need additional inventory of fuel, food, water, and other products to meet customer demand, so reorder early because all area stores have the same needs. Everything you do keeps you and your customers safe and gets the store open faster.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Craig. So I'm going to open it up to questions now. This is Carolyn again. So go ahead and type your questions in the chat box on the right on your screen. And I do have one that I'm going to put out there. I think it's probably Jim. This one's probably close to you. Who should have the job aids? Should it be every employee or just the store managers?
That's clearly going to be a decision of the store managers, but we built them so that every employee has the job aids, because there may be a time when the store manager isn't there and every employee becomes responsible for carrying out the tasks in the job aids. So our approach, our recommendation is definitely that this should be distributed to every employee and reinforced on a periodic basis with every employee.
I believe you said just about once a year is good, but probably right before something's happening too. I have one question here also. I am an emergency manager. Can I print and distribute these to stores in my neighborhood? Jim and or Craig, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I think we did the two versions, and this is really a product that the National Association of Convenience Stores developed. The more customized products are only going to be available through the association, but our goal is to use this as triggers to get stores to start thinking about this. And so that is available on the website. We would encourage people to look and credit back to the National Association of Convenience Stores, but for the more in-depth and the ability to customize the plans, obviously membership would be one of the benefits of having access to those products.
And I would, if I were an emergency manager, I would definitely want them to go out to all my stores, and you have permission to do that. We would encourage you to have them go to the NACS website and download themselves, because that way there becomes a record of who's downloaded the sites. And as we update this, and we will ask from convenience stores, we will ask for input periodically to update them, then your stores will be on the list of people who get the updated information about it. So yes, definitely get them out to your stores. A little bit better if we can maintain a knowledge of who is downloading them so we can keep them updated.
Great point. And just to reiterate that website, it's convenience.org/disaster plan. You can share that with everybody that you know. I know hurricane season I just saw is starting up again. Sounds like there's a couple of things out there, but this is, again, like Jim said, it's not hazard specific. So if we've got wildfires or tornadoes, the last time you want to be planning is when something's bearing down on you right at that moment. So go ahead and download those. And then the job aids are printed, like Jim said, that you can print them one to a page. Sometimes they're one in backside, 1 or 2 pages, but laminate them, put them in a binder. Any other questions? Let's see. How do we reach corporate or managers of convenience stores that are not on the National Association of Convenience Stores? Well, that's a great question. I can certainly answer a little of that myself from NACS. We are communicating this in all of our materials, which obviously is only getting to those people who are subscribing to those, our daily newsletter. But we also shared it with each state has, almost every state has 1 or more convenience store associations, petroleum marketer, petroleum fuel associations. And we've shared it with those associations as well and asked them to send it out to their members. Single store operators, those mom and pop stores out there, are the ones I think that need this the most. So anybody who has access to those folks, please do share it, whether it's through Chamber of Commerce. We've talked to that as well. So Jim or Craig, do you have any other thoughts on how we can get the word out?
Well, this is Craig. Obviously, social media, there's a variety of tools that people have. And again, this is, I would like to go back to this thing about how many of you had plans. And I've got a feeling that the people that tuned into this call probably have been doing this. It's your fellow convenience store operators and what we oftentimes call the competition that need this as well. So through your associations, through the various conferences, through local engagement, through your local chamber, spread the word. And I want to just point out one of the things I learned. You know, we oftentimes look at the other stores as competition, but the reality in a disaster, if the other stores aren't getting open, that can actually make your operation fail because you're built to service a certain level of the population. And the distribution of stores and the availability, particularly of things like gas, if you're the only store open, that's a good thing until it's not a good thing. And everybody's now lined up because you're the only place to get gas. It now overwhelms the system and gives people a bad experience. So during a disaster, the competition is actually part of the team as well. The more stores that can get open in an area, the better the distribution of the customers. It allows you to service the customers, maintaining a good customer experience and not have the challenges of being the only store open. We saw this a lot in 2005. We saw this during Superstorm Sandy, that those stores with gas that got open first were usually overwhelmed and people were not happy. The more stores that were able to open in an area, the better the outcome was for all stores because you were better able to distribute the demand signal. So, you know, the folks that weren't on the call is probably as much the target audience of anybody within the convenience store industry. And so using your contacts, using your tools, using your opportunities to bring on board other stores and other convenience store chains will also, I think, be key to being more successful preparing, responding, recovering from disasters. And again, our observation time and time again is when you're the only store open with gas, be prepared for the crowd and also the frustration when you run out. The more stores that get open, the better that system works.
There's one other piece on how to find out where these stores are, and it's not the ideal way, but go into Google Earth and type in the word convenience stores, and a list of all the convenience stores and everybody in Google Earth who has said convenience is my business come up. And I just did it and have about 45 here right in a several mile area. So it's a way to begin from those of you on the emergency management side to identify where these stores are. And you can then proceed to do a couple of clicks and have their phone numbers and addresses and all the rest. So it's a way to get started in extending your emergency plan out to this really vital constituency that you have.
All right. Continue to go ahead and put your questions in here, and I'll happily work with them. Jimmy got a lot of good shout outs here. I'll tell you those offline, but a couple folks are really appreciative of your presentation, and you too, Craig. All right. Jim, here's a question. I noticed that the video just now showed a mobile phone, oops, where'd it go? With some kind of, it just disappeared. With some kind of connectivity app. Is that part of the program? Is there a connectivity app expected?
Why don't you handle that one, Carolyn?
We're hoping to. We're hoping in our next phase of development to do an app with this on there. I know that some companies have their own intranets or apps that employees use, mostly the bigger companies, but because these are available to you to use, you're certainly very welcome to put them on any employee apps. Employees could also bookmark this, download it, however that works. But we're hoping to one day have an app that we can use that will tie into both these, have the videos and everything else. So more to come on that, hopefully within the next year. All right. So I like this. This is more of a statement, but I would recommend convenience stores who are being proactive and helping their community by planning for emergencies also reach out to their local emergency management departments because they are often planning for supply chain issues as well as risk assessments. And then the rest of it just cut off on me. So they may have more guidance or requests to consider while planning. Thank you, Jessica. That was a really good statement. And I think it, just like Craig said, reaching out to them and seeing what they need, even too. The stores reaching out to the emergency managers.
Yeah, this is Craig. That's important. But I think one of the other things that it's important is for convenience stores that are going to be open or are going to need assistance, being part of that local team so the emergency managers know this means that if you need additional security to help deal with traffic, if you need debris clearance to focus on certain areas so you can get resupplied, those are the kind of relationships you don't want to try to build during the disaster. You want to have that ahead of time. And as a local emergency manager, I would have much preferred to been working with my convenience stores, knowing which ones had the plans, which ones are most likely able to get open, so that if we did have to make decisions about route access or providing security, we already had that working relationship versus getting these requests during the disaster when there's so many competing demands, not really having a clear idea of what this was going to accomplish and maybe not even be able to get through to get that assistance. So these relationships before disaster are priceless. Those that have that relationship, I think, are in a much better position, one, supporting the community, but also the things that government inherently does to support your operations. Everything from making sure there's clear rules of engagement during curfews so that key staff and supplies can get through to stores, to, when you do have those traffic jams, being able to work with local officials where it's available to get law enforcement to help with that is it's going to be built upon the relationships before the disaster. During the disaster, it may be difficult even to break through the noise.
That's a great point. And somebody else just commented, Daryl, establishing reentry letters for employees by working with local emergency management folks will improve efficiencies and ensure sites are properly staffed. That's correct. We cover that in one of the job aids in one of the videos about carrying ID, employee IDs, or even just driver's licenses, but maybe having a letter written that they can work with that everybody knows what it's saying. Yeah,
this is correct. This is key based upon particularly from hurricanes, but we're also seeing this during some of the wildfires in California, that local officials who know who their convenience stores are, to have those prior arrangements that are providing that credentialing that, quite honestly, the law enforcement may be mutual aid from far outside the area and your ID may mean nothing to them. But if you have official clearance by the local officials, either by placard or letterhead or something that says you're allowed to get back in there, that speeds up your ability to get back open, which helps speed up the community recovery. We see this a lot in hurricanes or coastal communities out on the barrier islands where there's limited access. Having this prior arrangement so that they know you're part of the team, even if you are in the private sector. When the National Guard or mutual aid from far away is providing security, you're not having to explain to them who you are, what your store is. You've already been credentialed by your local officials to be able to get back on those islands or get back into the areas of devastation. And this all goes back to working with your local emergency managers, asking questions about reentry, asking about what kind of credentials would be required, and hopefully developing that relationship where they're providing you those documents or the guidance on how to get back in after disaster. Because I think the more and more emergency managers understand the role that convenience stores play in getting communities back on their feet, the better that planning will go forward.
Well, it's all about being good partners, and I think that's awesome. And maybe that's something we can look into. Jim is creating like a template letter that we can put out there with this project as well.
Yeah, I'll give you some examples we did in Florida for a lot of the retail federation, which included convenience stores, is members were able to go onto a secure site and download a time-specific placard that they could print out on a printer and stick in their windshield. It talked about this was an official part of the state emergency response team for this event on these dates. So it'd be the hurricane, like Hurricane Charlie, August 13th through, we ran that thing probably until about the middle of October. And again, it was something we did statewide to help a lot of different industries, from retail all the way down to some of the logistics stuff. And because we did this on a statewide basis, it made it much easier for multiple counties that were dealing with disasters, not having to come up with independent plans. And again, this is part of what the associations can do for you, is help you lobby and leverage these connections with state emergency management, so that when you're operating in multiple counties, and some of you operate across multiple states, not having to have a tailored solution for each community, but something more broad-based. So as an example, that's what we did in Florida. Other states have different plans, but again, this is why you want to do it now. Find out what those plans are, engage, use the association on your behalf, work with states, and help make these more uniform. Because again, the bottom line is the quicker you and your staff can get back in and get open, the faster that community is going to recover.
I'm going to go with one more question, and it says, and Jim, well, you might be able to answer this one. Do your job aids include recommendations for paying employees during long-term disasters? Our big disaster will know power is out for at least 3 months, so we are concerned this is not being considered in small business. Do you have a best practice for paying employees in conditions where banks and ATMs may not be functional?
On the idea of whether they should get paid when they are not working, we make reference to that, saying that the company should, in advance, define a policy that can be clearly communicated to the employees, but don't come up with a recommendation on it. The long-term outage of all cash operations is pretty rare. Those cases where we did see some folks who had to make cash payments to employees, they did it on a case-by-case basis, encouraging employees who needed special funds to reach out to the company treasurer, and made a good faith effort to provide that money in advance. But again, don't have a real recommendation on how to do that.
Thank you, Jim. I don't see any more questions coming in. So thank you to Craig and Jim for your support and your time today. Materials can once again be downloaded for free at convenience.org/disaster plan. And again, they're free. And all the videos are there as well. My contact information, Carolyn Schneer with NACS, is on there if you need to reach out or have any questions. If you do use these, there's an email address in there. You can send us if you ever have changes, updates, questions, comments about how something worked. And God forbid, if you have to use it, let us know that it worked well and any thing we can do to continue to improve the resources. So thank you again for joining us today and have a great day.